There's some people that want to get into relationships because they love the attention and validity that comes from having a partner that wants to be with you. It's not a bad reason, but it's probably not the best one to have as like your number one reason. There's some people that want to get into a relationship so that they can start banging around with other people, because guess what? Especially if you're a guy.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who used to think that bukkake was a Japanese form of martial arts. He is also a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. I feel like this episode is going to revolve around relationships, more so dating, just in some sort of way to, I don't want to say sanitize what I did with the previous episode, because it's not like I did something bad, it's just I didn't really talk about dating for the most part. But all in all, I do thank you so much for listening. I hope you listen all the way till the end. And, if you do like what you're listening to, if you don't like it, if you want to give feedback or if you want to suggest a topic, then on socials, at Bagaka the D is where you can find me on X, at The Breaktime Podcast is where you can find me on Facebook, and at The Breaktime_podcast is where you can find me on IG. You can find all the socials in the description below, as well as the link to hit me up directly via fan mail if you do not want to go through social media, since, there are some people that would love to avoid it. And, you can give your opinions, you can give your thoughts, and you can give your suggestions, and I would be more than happy to take them and work on them. Now, considering that this is a Friday episode, it does mean that I get to dive into the wonderful world of X, or was it Twitter, and look at a couple of tweets and break them down a little bit. So if you do have any tweets that you would like me to discuss, whether you find them on X, whether you find them on Facebook or on IG, and I will explain why and how in a bit, then the easiest way you can send them to me is via the DMs, because the DMs are always open. And the drill on how to do it is pretty simple, almost sounds like a song, and it goes like this. You see that tweet, you like that tweet, you want us to discuss that tweet, you send that tweet, you send it to the DMs of at Bagaka the D, which happens to be my personal X handle, and I will take it from there and I will handle it accordingly on Facebook and on IG. If it happens to be a screenshot, a screen grab, or if it ended up on a reel, then the place to send it to is at the Breaktime_podcast on IG or at the Breaktime Podcast on Facebook. The DMs are always open and I will take it from there and handle it accordingly. Now, I have a couple of tweets here that are very dating related that I need to get into, although before I can get into any of that, I first want to deal with some matters that I feel probably shouldn't even be as big as you'd expect them to be for some people. And honestly, you even sometimes wonder why it is that people make such a big thing out of something that isn't even that big. Now, instead of me trying to explain what it is that happened and talking about exactly who said what where, I am going to play the clip so that you can hear it from the horses' mouths themselves, and at least at that point I can break it down to y'all why it is that I find this to be incredibly petty. So without further ado...
So who sits in the back, your girl or your mom?
My mom.
Wow.
Listen to me. And my mother would have no.
I said wow since you said it fast.
No, my mother got to sit in the back. Are you crazy? You think I'm driving with my woman next to me in the car. We go pick up my mother. I'm gonna tell my woman get out the car and sit in the back.
I think that answer to that question is tricky.
No, it's not.
It is.
My mom got to sit in the back.
You know why it's tricky? Because it's one of those things you want your woman to be able to ask your mom. Like, come on, mom, you can sit in the front. If
she wanted to do that, that's up to her. But I would never create a standard for my woman to get out of the car to sit in the back for my mom. No, ain't nothing wrong with the back of the car.
You getting a ride.
Them cushions feel just as good as the one in the front.
I believe, even the Bible talks about how a man will leave his mother and his father and he'd stick to his wife. Me and my wife or my future wife will become one flesh. Right. She is my biblical and spiritual responsibility, and we have a covenant together. As much as I love my mother, she is not wrapped into this threefold cord, right? It's me, my wife, and God.
Honestly, if y'all knew how petty of a thing this is to me, okay, maybe it's petty to me and it's something a little bit more serious or quite tricky for other people, but let me just try and break it down the best way I know how. Now, interestingly enough, this whole talk of who gets to sit at the front, who gets to sit at the back of your car as a guy between your mom and your wife, it's actually not a new conversation. It's a conversation, or should I say it's a debate that happened a couple of years back. And oddly enough, during that time, either I think I felt like it was so trivial that I didn't talk about it, or I just didn't give it enough thought, or I'd be like, you know what, I think this is something that I should definitely talk about on the podcast. And it actually arose after a certain video went viral whereby a guy, his wife, or I think his girlfriend or his fiance or something, and the mom was supposed to be going somewhere, and the mom caused quite a lot of trouble by, I think, either sitting at the front or found the girlfriend or the fiance or the wife, dude's partner in general, seated at the front, and she decided to cause a bunch of fracas about it. And it became this conversation in relationship spaces where a bunch of people are like, oh, so would you let your mom sit at the front? Oh, who gets to sit at the front? Oh, like, you know, this and this means that value. And I never really gave it that much thought. Like, I never really bothered with it because I felt like this is just another instance of people causing a lot of drama over something that shouldn't even be that big. Because it's not like there's a certain form of quote-unquote car etiquette that determines who under what sort of ranking is supposed to sit at the front versus the back. Like, even in my own personal situation with my family, it's not like either of us have ever had to have that issue, at least as far as we've been adults for the past like decade, if not more, whereby we're like, oh, you know, who should sit at the front versus who should sit at the back. It's literally just, you find someone who's sat shotgun, you're just sitting behind them. So even though I was to get a partner and we're in the car together, my mom would just hop in the back. Like, it's not like she'd go and be like, oh, I want to sit at the front. Like, my mom, even when us guys were kids, when me and my brother would be fighting for who gets to sit shotgun, my mom would care so little about it, and she's like, if you want to sit at the front, I don't mind it. But I think both my parents didn't want us to fight over who gets to sit at the front more than the other and how that's fair or not. So my mom just sat at the front, and my dad never really cared to become the one who's like, oh, you know, who gets to sit at the front, who gets to sit at the back. So even for us as grown individuals, my brother and I, that's not really an issue. It's not something that we think about. It's not something that we debate over. And especially right now where like both my parents will sit at the back, both my brother and I will sit at the front. Like for us, it's a way of just having them be more comfortable because they're seated at the back. They don't have to worry about the road. They don't have to ride shotgun and decide who gets to touch what. They can literally just sit, and us guys will handle the entire journey ourselves. So when I see people busy debating on shit like this, because it was actually a friend of mine who posted it up on IG, and she was asking people, oh, so would you let your wife sit at the front or your mom sit at the front? And I'm the one who's like, you know, does it really matter? It may seem like I'm just treating it very trivially and very simply, but it is for me and my family. Like, it's not a problem. Plus, at some point, I think a lot of people kind of treat the whole sitting at the front thing a little too much, because you forget that, especially when you move up like to luxury cars, you start to realize that sitting at the back is a lot better for people. Like, you find that if you're riding in like an S-Class or a really premium grade luxury car, whether it's a sedan, whether it's an SUV, you find that sitting at the back is actually more luxurious. So at that point, if you were to upgrade to a car like that, if you were driving a car like that, would your partner suddenly be like, okay, let me go sit at the back, let your mom go sit at the front? Like, at that point in time now, that's when you can see that there's a certain level of favoritism, preferential treatment that's coming along. But if no one really gives a damn, and whoever the hell wants to sit at the front sits at the front, and whoever the hell wants to sit at the back sits at the back, like, you realize that most people wouldn't really give too much of a flying shit. Like, this is mostly a nothing burger. Like, it's just a bunch of nothing stuffed with etiquette about nothing that really has etiquette there, and it's literally just a case of who gets preferential treatment versus the other, which doesn't really matter when you're in a car. Like, at the end of the day, y'all are just trying to move from point A to B, so complicating this shit by trying to decide which seat is better for who, it's just a lot of thinking over nothing. And with a bunch of nothing addressed, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to the tweets, because I feel like these probably are a little bit more important. So, on to our very first tweet of this episode, which was posted up by a guy who said, and I quote, "I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who's looking for a relationship. I want to be in a relationship with somebody who didn't want a relationship till they met me." End quote. Okay, now, I can agree with this to a certain extent, just mainly because I feel like this is what you'd probably describe as an ideal or a fairy tale example of how you'd want to meet someone or be with someone. Like the idea that, oh, I didn't know that I wanted this until I met you is such a high standard. It's such a big ideal, which you can kind of have as more of an aspirational thing rather than reality. Because in reality, a lot of people end up being together under some of the wackiest of circumstances. There's people that realize that they wanted to be together forever after being friends with benefits for a long time and just doing the do and getting closer and closer, that they just got to a point where they were like, what if we just made this a relationship? And they've been around together for a bunch of years strong. There's people that ended up in a relationship with someone who was looking for a relationship, and they've been doing pretty well so far. And I can get the whole idea of not wanting to be with someone who's looking for a relationship, but I feel like it's more a case of why they're looking for a relationship or why they're looking to get into a relationship, as opposed to the fact that they are. Because there's a lot of people that are looking to get into a relationship because, for example, they have grown to a certain age and they want to settle down and have kids as fast as possible. Probably biological clock is ticking, or maybe they just feel that they need to settle down as soon as possible at that stage of their lives that they're in. So for them, you might find that dating with intention is something that is a little more up their alley. The whole idea of them having to wait for someone to be with them and be like, I didn't know that I wanted a relationship until I was with you, is something that will end up being very time inefficient for them. There's, of course, other examples of people that do want to get into relationships, but not for the best of reasons. There's some people that want to get into relationships because they love the attention and validity that comes from having a partner that wants to be with you. It's not a bad reason, but it's probably not the best one to have as like your number one reason. There's some people that want to get into a relationship so that they can start banging around with other people, because guess what? Especially if you're a guy, you're considered to be way hotter if you're in a relationship than when you're not. So your chances of bagging more women, and this is something that guys talk about all the time, even when they don't talk about it, it's like you just pull more women when you're in a relationship versus when you're not in a relationship. And if you're a married man, some people say that it might even be way more because you have the wedding band on you. So I feel like it's more a case of why the person wants to get into a relationship rather than the fact that the person wants to get into a relationship. I wouldn't want people who want to get into a relationship and are intentional about getting into a relationship to feel bad, because it's already tough enough as is. Especially depending on gender, you find that when someone is like, I want to get into a relationship, I want to get a partner, the first thing that people normally think is that the person is desperate, which isn't really the case. Sometimes people are just eager to get into a relationship because they've done the work, or maybe they went through something and they've gone through the therapy and they feel like they're ready to love again and actually be with someone. The desire for companionship is a real thing, and it's actually a good one. So for someone to come around and be like, I don't want to be with someone who just wants to be in a relationship, always question why. I feel like questioning why is probably a more important thing than simply selecting or deselecting someone because of their intentionality. But then again, I may or may not be wrong about that one, but I am going to leave it aside and move it on to our very next tweet of this episode, which says, and I quote, "There's no such thing as a quote-unquote ugly person. There are obviously conventions when it comes to attractiveness, but there will be someone out there that finds you aesthetically pleasing. You may need to do some searching. The internet has taught me that people can romanticize anything." End quote. Okay, I wouldn't say that there's no such thing as an ugly person, but I'm also not disproving what this person has said in terms of the internet, or at least people can romanticize anything. But I feel like people put too much attention or too much value on aesthetics and the looks of other people. Like, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, don't get me wrong. Like, as someone who's benefited from it in some way, shape or form, like, it is great when it is working for you, and it is shit when it is working against you. But reality of it is, there's way more to it when you're trying to be with someone than just their looks. And I think a lot of people tend to forget that today than possibly any other time before. Like, people forget that there's a lot of baddies out here. There's a lot of very beautiful women. And I'm saying this from a guy's perspective, especially considering that guys are the ones that are perceived to always be looking for aesthetics in women. Like, there's a lot of very, very fine women. There's a lot of beautiful women that a lot of guys have had a chance with, that they would have wanted to have a future with, that, you know, they looked at and they were like, you know what, I could put kids in this one and like have a fam with her. But these guys ended up aborting the mission because at some point they realized that the looks weren't it. And you look at the options that they ended up with as long-term partners, and you look at the difference in terms of looks, and you almost wonder what it is that these guys were actually looking for. And the truth of it is, it's not that the looks were bad, and it's not like the guy preferred the quote-unquote uglier babe. It's a situation where the guy literally looked at the set of qualities that the women had and chose the person that had the best qualities that actually suited him. So, for example, there's times when you find a guy is with a baddie, a super 10, very, very gorgeous looking woman, but ends up leaving her to be with someone that does not look as good as her because, for example, maybe the babe is loyal, is very peaceful, gives him a shit ton of respect, and can cook a pretty mean meal. Like, it's things like those that can make a guy get locked down on one babe, even though she's not the finest babe he's been with or he could currently be with. So for the most part, I feel like people put too much emphasis on aesthetics today, yet there's other qualities that can redeem and possibly even make you seem like a much better option beyond just your looks. Now, don't get me wrong, go and pay attention to your looks. Make sure you try and look as good as possible with what it is that you've got. But don't think that it's going to be your ticket to relationship goals and being the best option, considering that you have to add a bunch of other qualities onto it. And with that said, I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm going to leave it at that and move it on to our very final tweet of this episode, which was posted up by a guy who said, and I quote, "This generation is so obsessed with dating and marrying financially stable partners that they forget to check if they are mentally and emotionally stable, if they are spiritually sound and have even been raised well, if they know the value of family and peace." End quote. Okay, so this goes back to something that I've spoken about on this podcast before, and I've had discussions on other podcasts as well as with other people about the idea of judging men based on financial capability. And I've spoken about how this whole idea of being too broke to date is actually something that has cleared the dating market of some very, very good options in men. And it's something that's going to start biting people in the ass very, very soon if it hasn't started already. Because for the most part, like, yes, I know being with a guy that's financially stable and has this, you know, good amount of money behind them and they have a good amount of disposable income feels great and all, but a lot of times you find that because people have put so much emphasis on it right now in the dating market, you find that people forget and sometimes overlook the fact that some of these guys might not be the best people from an emotional, from a psychological standpoint. Some of these guys are mentally or emotionally unstable. Some of these guys might be bipolar. Some of these guys might be narcissists. And I know dude was saying financially stable partners, but I feel like it's more financially stable men, just mostly because you rarely ever see a guy busy saying that they want to be with a financially stable woman. Like, yes, guys would love that, but it's not like they list it in terms of qualities that they like on a babe. Of course, we don't want a babe that leeches from us, but it's not like we care that much about her financial status all that much. But I digress. Where was I? Now, the whole idea of being with someone who is mentally and emotionally stable is probably a little bit more important than just being with someone who's financially stable, because there's some guys that can be bipolar, there's some guys that are narcissists, and in as much as they can shower you with a bunch of bank, those conditions can actually be very, very bad on you as a partner in terms of how you're treated, in terms of the kind of love that you'll get or lack from your partner, and how they will approach a lot of the issues that will come between the both of you. Because let's not play ourselves here, like the money is great, but the money is just one thing. like being with someone who's financially stable, like yes, they give you a certain amount of stability, but that's not the only issue when it comes to relationships. So when you're with someone who, for example, is emotionally unstable and loses their shit, they could become physically abusive. And of course, in as much as people want to talk about how, they're busy moving around in a range or they're busy going for holiday in the Maldives every so often, if it's going to cost you your mental or your emotional or your spiritual health so that you can get all of that, then maybe you will end up questioning if the relationship itself is worth it. If you're being whooped twice a week or once every 2 weeks, but you're still being taken to very exotic places for holiday and you can take all the nice photos you want to take, it might seem great on the surface, but you might actually end up suffering for the most part. Although, then again, considering that I am not financially stable, maybe I am saying all of this because, I haven't been taking anyone out or I haven't been flown out or some shit like that. But still, for the most part, even with that said, like, it's not like there aren't rich guys that are great partners. Like, there's rich guys that are actually really, really good partners and treat their partners really, really well. But it doesn't discount the fact that there's a lot of guys that just have means, but they tend to be very, very shit people, whether it's just in general or to their partners. So I just want you to be a little bit more wary about that. A little bit more than, how much money they actually make. But then again, I may be wrong about this tweet just the same way I could be wrong about all the others, so I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. On Facebook and on IG, it is at the Breaktime Podcast and the Breaktime_podcast respectively. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.